Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Human Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're taking a look at some interesting stuff in the game Koneru-Paehtz, Munich FIDE Women's Grand Prix 2023. This is a very interesting game. It's quite an interesting opening. It's a very topical variation of the King's Indian that I actually played when I was a teenager. If only I kept on playing it. I had very good results with it. I don't really know why I stopped, but it transposes to a Modern Benoni, and there are some interesting parallels with a few other lines, and leads to a very complicated position where, I found a lot of things whilst analysing, and the engines, of course, showed me some extra stuff as well. So let's have a look. It was 1d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, castles, and bishop e3. Very topical line. What's the main idea of it? The main idea is to actually be able to play a quick g4, h4, g5, h5 if black plays the typical move e5. So after e5 we play d5, and then we can follow up with g4 and h4 and g5 and h5. And not having played the knight to f3 and having the bishop on e2, it makes a couple of things possible. First of all, it stops the black knight from coming round to g4 or to h5, and of course it makes g4 and h4 more possible. So quite a nice system, and I scored very heavily with it. So black's been looking at alternatives. Knight c6 has been fairly popular. There were a few Leela against Stockfish games in this line when this move bishop e3 was bishop e2, bishop e3 was tried in the TCEC. Knight c6 is interesting but very specific. When your knight comes to c6, it can end up getting chased over to h6 after h2 to h3. Very difficult positions to play. So c5 feels a little bit more normal, and actually I imagine that one of the reasons why Koneru-Paehtz chose this system was that Humpy Koneru, as white, had previously played d takes c5, but had a rather bad experience against the strong grandmaster Iturizaga. And after queen a5, so we're threatening knight takes c4, Koneru played the interesting idea f3 takes e5, knight d7, f4, but black had reacted quite quickly with knight c6, knight f3, f6, got a decent game, and then, eventually in the complications, black won. But it's never a bad idea to remind your opponent of a loss when you're choosing your opening repertory. Well, Koneru played d5 this time. b5 is possible, just aiming for a sort of a Benko type game. But e6 was what Paehtz plays, and there have been a lot of games in this recently, also at the elite level. Knight f3, e takes d5, c takes d5, and we are into a typical Modern Benoni position. Now there's been many different moves. Bishop g4 is kind of the normal Benoni move. The idea being that if you can exchange off the light squared bishop, then that's normally a good thing. Black, doesn't quite have enough space for all of the pieces in this structure. So bishop g4 is quite decent, and then this typically happens, which is interesting. I mean, it's always slightly better for white, but black's not in huge difficulties. There was a game knight d7, knight d2, knight e5. That was Geary against Jordan van Foreest in 2022, and black actually ended up winning that one, although it's quite risky putting the knight on e5 like this so early. White plays h3 and then f4 and drives it away. And there's a move that Paehtz played in this line, which was b5. And when I saw it, I was sort of scratching my head a little bit, because I had the feeling that I'd seen this before, and yet I couldn't quite place it. And I'll show you just what Koneru did against it, and where I'd actually seen this line before. So Koneru reacted with e5 in this position, d takes c5, bishop c5, hitting the rook on f8, rook e8, and bishop takes b5. Yeah, this again, seemed really familiar. And actually, it turns out that I had seen something like this, but in a nearly identical line. I'll just go back to the beginning then and show you how you get this line from a normal line of the Modern Benoni. And that's d4 knight f6, c4, and then e6, knight f3, c5, d5 takes, d6 knight c3, g6, and then this move h3, which is one of the main lines. Bishop g7, e4 castles. And now I was looking at a video by Rustam Kazimjanov, former world champion and also long-term second for Vichy and also for Fabiano Caruana. Very strong player, very good theoretician, and he showed this interesting line, bishop e3. And the idea is then that if you go b5, that's the point. You go e5, takes, bishop takes c5, rook e8, bishop b5. And, well, I'm sure you can see the similarity to what we get in the game. The only difference is that white has got this extra move h2 to h3, which is actually incredibly useful. I mean, this position for white is just much better. The one in the game is much more unclear, but that's basically where this line comes from. So yeah, always fascinating just to see the parallels and how things come across. But in our move order, what happens is that white plays bishop e2 first instead of h3, and then well, basically when you get to this position and e5, bishop c5, bishop takes b5, it's a second move with a bishop, and you don't have this move h2 to h3 in. So knight bd7, hitting the bishop on c5, bishop e3, and now knight g4, that's the one. Well, you can see why h3 was useful. And, well, what is this position? Very unclear. I mean, white's a pawn up, which is obviously pretty good. And, yeah, I mean, there's not like anything super clear for black. It's not like, black's at white's throat. But black does have a lot of open lines, a lot of open squares for the pieces, well, black's also threatening to get the two bishops, which will always be some sort of compensation for the pawn. Now there's a previous game of Levon Zaronian's that had gone queen d2 takes. That was Aronian Theodoru in chess.com Rapid in 2022, and yeah, white won eventually. Though, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was amazingly scary for black. Koneru played the move castles, which is very interesting. Knight takes c3, and then f takes c3. And this was basically where, here or a little bit later, is where I started analysing. So what has Koneru's novelty done? Well, if we're looking at the position, white's obviously a pawn up, like we said. Black now has the two bishops for compensation, and you've got to say that the dark squares are fairly tempting, really. Obviously, you've got this going to have got this sort of light pawn structure, pawn on d5. So there's there's lots of nice squares, like around d6, c5 to attack. Also, this pawn on e3. Is kind of a bit of a weakness there. Just can be attacked by stuff like queen b6 and bishop h6. However, although the dark squares are something of a minus point for white, well, taking on e3 like this has opened up the f-file, and that f7 point is quite sensitive for black. And, of course, this pawn on d5 isn't necessarily fixed. It might even move on to d6 and allow stuff like knight d5 to e7. So, yeah, very confused and complicated situation. Paehtz played the move rook b8, which is very nice, just hitting the bishop and looking at the b2 pawn beyond it. And, well, white's got to work out exactly what she is going to do in this. And here already I started looking at some little stuff. The move that I really wanted to play was to play the move d6 in this position. So because what I want to do is, if black ever goes a6 to chase my bishop away and hit this b2 pawn, then I can come back to c4, and then this f7 square will be very weak indeed. So that seemed like an interesting idea. I was looking at a couple of things here. After d6, one idea for black always is to play the move e4. I mean, what does it do? Well, it's a very nice King's Indian move. It's opening the line of the bishop, potentially freeing the e5 square for the knight or for the rook. It disrupts white's position, so that's quite interesting. Black's also threatening bishop c3 and rook b5. This knight on b5 is a little bit loose. So we have to go knight d4 and then queen g5. This was what I was looking at. It's actually a double threat. We're threatening queen takes e3, and we're also threatening bishop takes d4 and then rook takes b5. So queen e2 is a nice way of defending both the pawn on e3 and the bishop on b5. And now black plays rook b6. This is a very nice move. I mean, we're attacking d6, and the problem was that white was threatening knight c6 to e7. This was another nasty idea, and rook b6 sort of anticipates that. Now, I had a few little ideas here. Rook takes f7 was the move that really got my heart beating faster, because the idea is that if you go king takes f7, I've got this rather unusual thing which I spotted just analysing by myself, so I was quite pleased. It's weird sometimes, stuff just comes in a flash and you don't really understand why can't you do that all the time, but this combination obviously came quite naturally. So knight e6 check, rook e6 forced, because obviously we were forking the queen. Queen c8, rook e8, rook f1 check, nasty, bishop f6. Obviously, if you go knight f6, then queen takes c8 is checkmate. Bishop f6 and then queen takes d7. This is really, really strong for white, of course. We're threatening queen takes c8. We've got probably knight takes c4 if you move the rook away. Queen's looking on both sides here as well. It's just completely winning for white. Unfortunately, black's got this move bishop takes d4. So trying to destroy this knight on d4 so that it can't come into e6. I've got a little line. I do have an idea. I've got rook e7 in this position, which means that white is going to emerge with a slight advantage. We take, check, king h1, takes, queen e3 and knight f6. And it's a little bit better for white because, this pawn on e4 is a little bit weak, and the black king's a little less exposed as well. But it's not major in any way, so not a big winning attempt there, but still, you get an idea of the attacking chances there that are in black's position. Actually, the engine thought that queen f2 was going to be the best there. Rook f8 and now knight takes e4, queen e5, and then we take and go knight f6 check here. Queen e3 and king h1, and sorry, not king h1, but rook f2 here. And my engines were thinking that the black is still sort of surviving somehow. You go queen e4 and you're trying to worm your way back and get this pawn on d6, but black was drawing in the end, but it was definitely uncomfortable all the way. So it looks like this move e4, concept e4 and queen g5 isn't the best. But actually, I came up with the move that I thought was best, and it turned out that the engine thought that as well. And just bear this one in mind because it's going to come across all the time. I mean, black's best idea is just to play the move rook to f8. And it's weird, having played rook e8, that you play rook to f8 again. But of course, the rook is defending the pawn on f7. That's very, very important. And the key point is this knight on d7 gets to move. So, and it's got a variety of squares. And once this knight on d7 moves, this bishop can also move to some good squares. And the key point is really that white isn't at black's throat here. So this sort of calm consolidating move, you've actually got some time for it. And how did the games typically go? They went bishop b7, knight d2, and now, for example, bishop h6, rook e1, rook c8, queen e2, knight b6, and black was just very nicely developed. I mean, we've got pressure all over the place here. The pieces are quite nicely placed here, and this pawn on d6 is tough to hold. So position was around equal basically. So that is quite interesting there. So d6 probably not quite the best move. The engines wanted to play the move rook c1. That was the move they thought was best. Then we get this move rook f8 again, b3, e4, and knight e5. And yeah, you know, I mean, this is a very typical position. Knight c6 takes, queen b6. And you know, white's got an extra pawn, but black's got some lovely dark squares and is playing along the dark squares. It's you know, decent compensation for black, basically. In this particular case, the engines were coming with a quick bishop h6 to line up on e3 again, and we've got ideas like even bishop a6 into d3 afterwards as well. So so that was you know, kind of an interesting point. What Koneru did though was very, very interesting. She played king h1, and I mean, that's a very useful move. I mean, we've seen a number of cases where this pawn on e3, there's been a queen takes e3 or something like that. So makes a lot of sense to put the king on h1. The thing that really struck me about it though was that, you know, white's just giving up this this pawn on b2. I mean, black can play a6, take the pawn on b2, and white's just saying fine by me. You know, which is pretty bold, you know, but it's not the engine's favourite idea. The engine thinks that, you know, that now black should be completely fine. But I think it's a very challenging idea, you know, and I like it quite a lot, actually. So a6 was played, bishop c6. Why do we throw this move in, a6? Well, partly so that we can get at the pawn on b2. Partly also is that after e4, knight d4, this knight would be able to come into c6. When you force the bishop to c6 here, then that can't happen. White could play the move bishop a4, but then, well, at some stage we're going to get hit more by knight c5 or something like that. There's nothing wrong with bishop c6. And this was where I started analysing, actually. So Elizabeth played the move e4, which I think is, you know, like really natural, and I think any King's Indian player would play this, should play this straight away, opening up the line of the bishop and also freeing squares for the pieces, as we said before. The knight can come to e5, even the bishop can come to e5, you know, can aim against the h2 square, or even the rook can come to e5 and head over to h5. It's a big sort of nexus, that e5 square, so great to free it up. Yeah, I mean, you could go rook takes b2. The engines weren't too keen. I was assuming that knight e4 was good, but the engines actually just want to play rook f8, get out of the way, and say that d6 square is not so useful. I think that that actually the engines were just playing a move like e4, and just basically claiming that with this bishop trapped behind the pawn, white has a slight advantage. Yeah, probably true, but you know, not too huge. But obviously, you know, this move e4 makes a lot of sense. And now we've got a little choice here. In the game, Koneru played knight d2, which I do quite like, to be honest. You know, you're attacking the pawn on e4, of course, and this knight can aim for a c4, which is a pretty nice square. You know, it well, defends b2, aims for d6. Knight d4 was something that I got interested in. Actually, I was looking at ridiculous attacking options, but none of them seemed to work, actually. One idea I had was to go knight e6, takes. Yeah, you know, sort of hoping for some attacks there and maybe some pins if you take on e6. But simply queen g5 is really strong here. So hitting the pawn on g2, the pawn on e3, c3 is hanging. Actually, it's quite hard for white to cover this this second rank effectively in this way. And again, the same way is that if you go d6, you know, I was looking, thinking maybe about going bishop d5 or knight d5 into e7. Again, queen g5 is very unpleasant here as well. The best move for white actually after here is to go queen c1, which the engine thought was a little edge. But rook b6, queen c2, and now this key move again, rook f8, just unpinning, and then after knight e4, knight e5. You know, black's very, very active here. I mean, you know, we've got, you know, our bishops can come out, queen can come out, rook, even something like rook b4 to c4, even knight c6, you know, at times will be dangerous, just breaking up that that protection. So black's always doing well. I mean, you're a pawn down all the time, but you're a King's Indian player, right? So have to be prepared for that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, actually, you kept on noticing that one of the drawbacks to knight d4 was that this the queen could come to this square g5. So knight d2 is also quite nice from that point. When we take on e4, we're also covering the g5 square as well. And here Elizabeth took a very a controversial decision, I think you could call it. I think, to be honest, it was a very ambitious decision. Elizabeth played f5, so maintaining that pawn wedge on e4. I mean, I really have the feeling that this was that Elizabeth was probably feeling very optimistic about her position and decided, well, I want to have it all, basically. But it does feel very loose as well. I mean, this diagonal a2 g8 is being opened, and d6 is definitely going to be a very big idea for white. So yeah, I mean, just in general, it makes me feel very nervous, a move like that. The other slight shame is that, well, I kept on analysing lines where, well, being able to move along the fifth rank towards the white king side was quite useful, and, well, obviously putting a pawn on f5 kind of blocks that. Also blocks in the light square bishop, which doesn't have much scope really. But yeah, I mean, it's a very ambitious move. But the move that I wanted to play really, and obviously it's not rocket science, was rook takes b2. And why do you like moves like that, just in general, when you're analysing? Well, the point is, a move like rook takes b2, it wins a pawn, obviously. But what it also does, it increases the scope of this dark square bishop, which now has got a path all the way actually to a1. And when you're calculating and you're looking at complicated positions, complicated strategy or tactics, I always find it very reassuring when the moves that I'm choosing are also achieving good positional goals and also being kind to my pieces. I mean, a move like f5, if it doesn't work out, and white ends up protecting the b pawn and all of that, then this bishop has not really gained any scope. Whereas with a move like rook takes b2, okay, maybe it's not the best, but at least I've got some positional result to it. My bishop on g7 is super active, and yeah, it just if you're aware of little goals like that when you're calculating complicated lines, well, it often avoids you doing anything completely bananas and crazy. Because normally the best lines also have some element of increasing the activity of your own pieces. That's just a general rule of thumb that I try and go for. That I'll only go for tactics which serve no positional goal whatsoever, only if I don't have something that sort of I feel is good and also has some other goals as well. Sort of multi-purpose moves, basically. So knight ce takes e4 is white's reply. So this knight might be coming into d6. We might have a knight c4 later. And then, well, the best move in this position, and I found it in the end, which was quite good, is again this move, rook f8. Just defending the f7 pawn, actually sidestepping knight d6, and then preparing to play knight e5. And actually this is working out very well for black. Rook b1, for example, takes knight e5. This was the line that I had. And, well, I mean, you're just going to go bishop f5 and queen h4 and all this stuff. And, you might take on c6 at some stage if white isn't careful. Just looks, very, very pleasant. Rook f8 wasn't the move I looked at immediately. I mean, queen h4 was a sort of I suppose those sort of moves are always my first reaction. The idea actually was just because I thought, well, after knight d6, I've got this clever move bishop e5, hitting d6, and also h2. And if knight f3, I've got queen g4, so I'm threatening mate, which means I'm going to be winning this piece. But after queen h4, well, I mean, rook f4 was the move that put me off. It might not even be the very best line, but well, I mean, either if I go back to e7, I'm going to get hit by d6 at some stage. Queen h6 is the only sort of attempt to sort of make some real use of queen h4, but it just felt all wrong. I don't analyze lines like this, certainly not during a game. until I've exhausted all other possibilities. Moves like this that end up putting my pieces on rather odd, somewhat poor squares. I'm only going to start really spending time analysing these if I feel there's nothing else. And I didn't feel that I was at that point yet. I mean, rook e5 was something that I really liked. Again, you're getting out of the pin. Oops, good lord, sorry. Again, you're getting out of the pin on this knight, and actually you're looking to go rook h5 and try and gain some counterplay some way. And it's a decent move. The only thing is it's again similar to what I said before about about playing attacking lines that are also kind to your pieces. And this move rook e5, it gets in the way of knight e5, so it means you're going to have to move this rook again. And when I'm playing the rook over to h5, I'm putting it out of play. And if that turns out not to be good, then I've just really misplaced my pieces. So again, it's not as it's something where I say, well, it's maybe not the first thing I'll look at. I'm glad I've spotted it, but I'll probably only start investigating it if other quieter lines, more normal, natural lines that are kinder to my pieces, if those don't work out. And to be honest, I was a little bit concerned about just this simple move rook b1 to exchange off the rooks, when I sort of thought, isn't it frustrating this rook's on e5 and that my knight can't come to e5? And if white keeps the knights close to the white king, then when you go rook h5, I can do stuff like knight f3, for example, and then knight g3, and I'm nicely covered. This rook is not going to cause too much danger. So rook e5 was interesting, but I wasn't 100% sure about it. So that's why I like rook f8. And the key thing was any quiet line from white, you just go knight e5 and you're doing nicely. Truth be told, actually, rook takes b2 is not the engine's first move. It wants to go rook f8 first and then afterwards go rook b2, which in some way is more accurate, but the idea is exactly the same. So after f5, knight c4. I wasn't. I thought that Elizabeth's next moves were a little bit slow. Actually, black has the possibility here to play the move knight e5, because bishop e8, knight c4, when we've got all sorts of threats like knight e3, knight b2, rook b2, as well as queen e8, of course. That looked really, really bad. So if you go knight e5, I go rook takes c5, and then I play the queen to d6, and play rook e7, bishop e5. Seemed decentish for black to me, and the engines thought that was quite reasonable as well. Rook f8 is quite slow, Koneru takes a chance, d6. And straight away you see that all the tactics are wrong now for black. I mean, if knight here, we just take and go queen d5 check, for example. So that's very dangerous. If you go knight b6, for example, I can just take, and well, I've got loads of ideas, knight a4, knight d5, even d7, with the idea simply that rook c6, queen d5 check. It's just this move f5. It's really made all the tactics, just very, very dodgy for black. So Elizabeth played king h8, and that's definitely the best move. But here, actually, what you do have to say is that, obviously this move f5, supporting the pawn on e4, created a strong point and created some strengths in black's position. And here, actually, white started to drift a little bit, and actually, white needed to be really, really concrete at this specific moment in order to make anything of the advantage. And I'll show you what Koneru played here as white. She played the move rook c1, very sensible and all that. But it's really funny. I was so fixated all the time on knight e5 happening, and for my feeling, I played e4 to get the knight to e5. I didn't actually spot until the engine pointed it out that not knight f6, but knight c5 was really strong. And actually, at this stage, the engines I was using to analyze, Stockfish and Leela, and also Ethereal, they're all giving black a slightly better now. So yeah, I mean, this knight is coming into d3, and all of a sudden your pieces are cut off. The white major pieces are cut off from supporting this pawn on d6, which can definitely become a weakness. And well, the best thing that the engines were finding was to try and give up the exchange and hold the draw. So knight e2, knight f4, and well, white still got some initiative, but yeah, the engines were thinking that it was no more than a draw. The key idea actually as well is that after d7, we don't take on c1, even though that wouldn't be so bad, but we actually play the move knight b4, and if we take like this, we go queen takes c8, and these two are forked, so black's won the pawn back and will also win the piece back on c6. Tactics. So yeah, I mean, knight c5 would have been really strong, and then you see the real positive point to Elizabeth's move, f5 supporting e4. So what should white have done instead of rook c1? Well, this is the thing, and obviously, when I saw this move originally, I was thinking, really? But well, this is the idea: knight a4 in order to stop c5, prophylactic, stopping knight c5. But it also means that if, as in the game, the knight moves over to f6, then we come in with knight c5, and we're just going to force through d7. So yeah, this is very, very powerful. And the other big point about achieving d7 when you've got your knight on c4 is that you've also got this move queen d6, which is very important to defend the pawn on h2. Note, by the way, as well that the fact that h2 is weak, that's also due to Elizabeth's move e4, because well, it means that white can't defend h2 with a knight on f3. So knight a4 was really strong, and then well, Leela's had a lovely little spicy reply, rook b5 here, with the idea that takes forks the knights. So that was gorgeous. But yeah, rook c1, knight f6, and now well, depending who you ask, Leela wanted the calm b3, Stockfish wanted the very nice b4, rook c5, knight c5, just freeing the c5 square for the knight so that you can force d7 in. And that was very, very strong. But the tactics were incredible. Knight g4, d7, rook c4, queen c7. Why did we go rook c4? Well, we know why, because queen c7 would have allowed queen d6. So we take away the knight in order to play queen c7, and then we get these incredible tactics. Fork of the queen and two rooks, but knight e6, and obviously d8 queen is going to be happening. Takes knight e3, rook c1, and then after all those fireworks, white emerges a piece up. And this is Stockfish against Dragon in one of my engine matches. So you can see that the tactics are still quite dangerous, but knight a4, stunning prophylactic idea there. So after rook c1, knight f6 was played by Elizabeth. Actually, a very decent move. I mean, this knight is aiming for g4, but it's just not quite the power of knight c5. Yeah, and the engine seemed to think that white's just got a slight advantage here. Nothing particularly amazing. Koneru's b3 was maybe a little slow. Bishop e6, and now knight d5. And now this is really where black, I think, started to go wrong. Actually, knight g4 was a very nice idea here. Just, yeah, threatening to go queen h4. And the cunning idea is that after queen d2, you have this move knight e5. So threatening knight takes c4 and then queen d6. And we're also obviously attacking the bishop on c6 as well, so there's got to be some reaction. And if you go knight takes c5, then there's this little intermediate move queen d6. And, well, this knight can't get to a safe spot. I mean, if you go to c4, I go queen takes c6. So, yeah. White has to take on g6, h takes g6, but then we've got some sort of reasonable position here where white's obviously going to be a little bit better, but black is surviving quite nicely. So knight g4 would have been quite good. Yeah, after bishop d5, black's best actually was just to try and line up on the d6 pawn and try and win it, and that still wasn't so bad for black. but after rook b5, that's when things started to go a little bit pear-shaped. Bishop b6 would have been a really strong move for white now. Bishop c6 was also quite good. The bishop comes here and supporting d7. And, well, I'll just show you the end of the game. It's already getting quite difficult. The very best line that the black had was to play queen h3. After queen h5, then white gained the extra possibility of just playing rook c2 here. Obviously with a queen on h3 would have been impossible, but after queen h5, rook c2. So the rook's covering the h2 square. That's going to leave the queen free to roam. And, well, basically after d7 and knight d6, this was kind of completely terminal, basically. And Elizabeth resigned very soon after. But a very interesting game, you know, lots of content there. I think, you know, first of all, very interesting opening line. Interesting to compare it, of course, to a line where white had played h3, because yeah, here this obviously gave black an extra possibility, and well, that extra possibility seems to be crucial, basically, in terms of making it sort of playable for black or not. And then yeah, you know, very interesting lines here. I mean, king h1 I thought was very interesting, even if it was not the engine's best move. d6 again, you know, also very interesting. It's a very interesting struggle between white with a slightly broken pawn structure and facing the two bishops, but an extra pawn and yeah, some chances against the black king. And then, you know, I thought it was always very interesting how, you know, this move rook f8, you know, was always tending to be the best. You know, in a sharp position, you just take a timeout, but consolidate your own position and free your pieces to you know, to use a good square. And yeah, you know, thought that was very, very interesting. And then also, you know, Elizabeth's choice was very interesting as well. Maybe a little bit over ambitious, you know, but it just shows, you know, when Koneru wasn't quite concrete enough, then you know, the whole position switches. Just one slightly wrong move, and black could already be better if black can exploit the you know, the advantages of her plan. And yeah, this move knight a4 from white, you know, really, really brilliant. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, I just meant it. Just started off for me as a little a bit of an analytical exercise, just have a little look at stuff, and it just ended up, you know, getting quite large as you know, as you discovered more and more interesting facets to this line. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you enjoyed it, why not give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at my new course, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, available as a book or as a Chessable video course, which I can thoroughly recommend, of course. And otherwise, you know, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next video. Thanks for watching.